I'll introduce myself. My name is Kendall Vanderslice. I am the founder of the Edible Theology Project. We develop resources to help individuals and churches find community, rest, and connection at the table. And so we use storytelling about food around the table in order to build deeper relationships and talk about things that we maybe don't enjoy talking about, but that are important to discuss. And so tonight I'm so excited to have a conversation with Michael Weir. I will introduce him in just a moment. But I'm really excited for this conversation. This is the second of our summer table conversation series. So if you were able to join us in June, we had Ashley Island with us, and in August we'll be joined, or no, I'm sorry, in May we had Ashley Island, and in July we'll be joined by Andy Colbert. And so this is a really wonderful series that I've had so much fun putting together. And tonight's event is sponsored by the Center for Public Justice, which is an organization that I have gotten to work with a couple of times now. I am just so impressed by the work that they do. And so Maddie Allen is going to take a moment and introduce herself and introduce the Center for Public Justice, who has sponsored our event this evening.
Thank you so much, Kendall. So good evening, everyone. I'm so excited to be with you tonight. As Kendall just mentioned, I'm Maddie Allen. I am the advocacy manager at the Center for Public Justice. The Center for Public Justice is a Christian public policy and civic education organization. And our mission really is to just equip citizens, develop leaders, and shape policy in a pursuit to serve God, advance justice, and transform public life. CPJ has several different programs that focus on different aspects of policy, but one area that I focus on is a program called Families Value, which is our program that's used to promote good work that enables all families to flourish. It's a program that really focuses around two core principles. The first is that
your phone,
families are the foundation of healthy communities and societies, and that all work, including family caregiving, has inherent dignity motivated by. And so these two principles, while they seem maybe not inherently related to policy, have a lot of policy implications and political implications. And so because of these principles that our work is rooted in, CPJ promotes policies like paid family leave, pregnancy accommodations, maternal health access, family-oriented benefits, childcare ecosystem that serves America's diverse families well. So Families Valued has for years now hosted different quarterly community calls to serve as a place of people, of a place for people of faith who are passionate about families and their communities and gathering together. And we wanted that space to be an area where they could support the need to gather together and encourage each other towards a more hopeful future for their families and for their community. And this year, we've been particularly focused on a theme of courageous community. We know that during an election year, it can feel really easy to slip into patterns of fear and panic, especially when it comes to talking about politics. The implications of politics and public policies have real impacts on families and communities and can cause tensions in neighborhoods. In the last 8 years, political strife has caused many people to lose relationships with friends and families and neighbors. And we've been invested in thinking about how do we bring that community back together. We know the solution can't be silence and fear, and that we need to think towards conversation. So how can we be courageous in our individual actions? How can we believe that one small voice actually means something, and that asking more questions and starting conversations with your neighbors, family members, church members actually causes a change to happen? So these are some of the questions that we've really been tackling this year, specifically within the context of politics and public policy, but definitely has implications for a wider net than that. And this is why we have really just been so excited to support this conversation happening tonight as an organization. CPJ is very thankful for the work that both Kendall and Michael do, and the way that they have helped communities have courage to have hard conversations and to, instead of turning away from politics or public engagement, have asked the question of, as Christians, how can we be a better voice? How can we be better involved and contribute to our communities? So I'm excited to talk later a little bit about how ways you can maybe partner with us in that and get involved. But I just want to thank Kendall for having this event and creating this space. And we're definitely really excited to be able to be a part and sponsor that.
So thank you so much, Maddie. All right, let's get the technical pieces here replaced. Wonderful. Well, we will move right on to our conversation. I am so excited to welcome Michael here with us this evening. Michael is the founder of the Center of, I always get the order of things wrong. The Center for Christianity and Public Life. Did I get that right? Okay. And I will let Michael talk a little bit more about what his organization does and what that entails. And so part of our goal this evening is to actually hear a little bit, Michael, of your story and how you got into the work that you're doing. So rather than read your bio right up front, I would like to give you the opportunity to tell some of your story. So this conversation this evening is largely based around Michael's book, The Spirit of Our Politics. But Michael has also written a second book called Reclaiming Hope. I don't remember the subtitle of that. I clearly don't have my notes totally correct, but it's about his time working in the Obama White House. So Michael has been thinking about the intersection of Christianity and politics through actually sort of experience in the political world for many years. And so I deeply admire Michael's work and I'm very excited to have you here this evening. But we're starting not with the topic of politics or your work. We're starting with the topic of food. And so we have the recipe that we have this evening is for macaroni with the egg. The is important. So Michael, you have an essay about this, and I will link that when we send out the recap to all of you all and to everyone who's registered and is watching the playback video. And so you can read a little bit more about this particular recipe. But I wondered if you could start by telling us about this recipe and why it's meaningful to you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Kendall. And I'm such a big fan of the Center for Public Justice and so glad that they're partnering on this event. This dish for me is care, it's comfort, it's family, it's childhood. It was the thing that my mother would make me when I was sick or not feeling well or just needed a pick me up, and it's a depression era dish. For folks who saw the recipe, there's not too much to it, but it's so fulfilling, and it's the kind of thing that my grandmother would sort of sit down and just watch me eat it in the middle of the day, and so I thought this would be a good pick. I also picked it because I already have an essay written about it, so I felt like there was a whole story already there. So that would be helpful too.
Yeah. Well, it's delicious. I had never actually heard of, is it ditalini? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
The type of pasta that this is. And so I had to search very hard at my Harris Teeter to find it, but I did. I figured I could use macaroni if it didn't work, but I found
Yes.
the right pasta. It is delicious. If you did not get to make it for this evening, then I highly encourage you all to make it. It's very easy, just boiling the pasta, whisking an egg into it. I don't know if I did it correctly. Mine turned out very thick. So I
It
don't know if
looks
I should have
great.
done more pasta water, but well, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more. In the essay about this dish, you talk a lot about your family, your upbringing, your sort of questions with sort of home and what family is. And so I wondered if you could tell us more about your family and about how both faith and hospitality were woven into your upbringing.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in a big Italian Catholic family in Buffalo, New York, in the Rust Belt, and growing up, it felt like everyone was Catholic, and it didn't have a large immediate family, but had a large extended family. And my childhood was in some ways really complex, but had a few anchors that were key sort of sources of stability. My parents divorced when I was 5, and that sort of set off a whole trajectory of moving quite a bit, moving all over and having to rely on other family in ways that I don't think my mother had imagined she would have to at other earlier stages of her life. I spent a lot of time at my grandparents, and that was really the source of stability in my childhood, particularly my grandfather, who is the reason for so many things in my life, including probably the fact that I work in politics and civic life. And he was just an incredible man, served in World War II, came back and was involved in his community. And so I loved spending time around him. I would sleep over at my grandparents' house multiple times a week. And this is exactly the kind of dish, this and a big salad that my grandmother would make and put in this big wooden bowl that was bigger than the size of my head for sure. And those are some of the sweetest memories of childhood for me.
I love that. I really love that. So you mentioned briefly that it was, I believe you said your grandfather who was part of the reason that you ended up working in politics. What made you pursue a life in politics, and maybe what was his role in that?
Yeah, so it's hard to discern. I had a significant interest in civics from a young age. And the best I've been able to do to try and tell where that came from is my grandfather. He wasn't a political person, but as I said, he served his country in World War II, came back, and was the kind of person that people trusted, and that could be trusted to be of service and be of support. I became a Christian when I was 15 after reading Romans, and for a season after that, I thought, well, now I need to go to seminary, become a pastor. You just want to do the most Christian thing you could think of. And thankfully, I had a pastor in my life who said, Michael, there are Christians who aren't pastors. And I thought that's a really keen observation. I'm glad someone pointed that out to me at this point. I very early in my life, this vocational question of what does it mean to be faithful in and with public things was something I could articulate as a teenager, and it led me to Washington, D.C., where I studied political science, and the rest is history.
Can you tell us a little bit about sort of the vocational journey that you've been on, and what led you to the point that you're at now with the Center for Christianity and Public Life?
Yeah, sure. So I went to George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and during my freshman year there, I was supposed to be taking a group of students to an event at the Washington Hilton Hotel. And I show up and not many people are there, but I was, I was 18 years old at the time, and had never been to a big political event before. So I just figured I'll walk around this hotel and find out where this thing is. And after about 10 minutes of looking, I asked the receptionist, and she says, "Oh, honey, that's not for another couple days." I just had the complete wrong date for this event. And as I was leaving the Hilton Hotel, walking through the lobby, a young senator by the name of Barack Obama was walking into the hotel for meetings the day or two before this event. And I told him I wanted to work for him, and 10 months later, I was in Iowa for his first presidential campaign, and I worked on religious outreach for him from early on. First, on the first campaign, I was an intern, and then I worked on the inaugural, and then I worked in the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships for 3.5 years. And then I came back. I worked on his reelect, and then I came back for the second inaugural. And I left at that point because I wanted to take the experiences and knowledge that I had gained working in environments like that to serve directly with and partner directly with the church. I saw a cultural environment in a political environment that was getting much more fraught and much more complicated, and in some ways more antagonistic for Christian leaders and organizations to navigate. And I wanted to serve directly with them. And so I did that for almost a decade. And that led me to start the Center for Christianity and Public Life, which we launched just over 18 months ago. And just very quickly there, the mission of the center is to contend for the credibility of Christian resources in public life for the public good. And we do that through spiritual formation and public imagination work. So essentially think of leadership development that both the resources and is resourced by a think tank, and we're really excited about how the work is going so far, but we're building it and excited about what's to come.
Well, I love getting to go to CCPL's inaugural summit this last fall, and you opened the event with a talk where you talked about how, you know, the things we're told not to talk about at the table are politics and religion, and that is here at Edible Theology exactly what we like to talk about at the table. But I think oftentimes when we hear the word politics, the what the word itself means can be murky. People immediately go to sort of partisan politics. You know, the idea of politics and hospitality are seen as sort of polar opposites, whereas I think in many ways they actually go hand in hand. And so I wondered if you could define for us a little bit, when you use the term politics, what do you mean?
Yeah, so I mean, you know, very simply and directly, those activities related to self-governance, to the project of self-governance. Now, right, part of what has developed is that politics produces a culture of its own. So there is a saying, sort of culture, politics is downstream of culture. I don't think that's true. It neglects the fact that politics produces culture of its own that influences other areas of culture, and so politics has saturated so much of life outside of governance specifically. But when I talk about politics, in most contexts, I'm referring to those activities related to governing and self-government.
Great. So in your book, The Spirit of Our Politics, which again, I highly recommend that people buy and read. It is a really wonderful book about how we think about the relationship between spiritual formation and our political life. But in the book, you write that Christians often approach the intersection of faith and politics with the idea that Christianity is either useless to our political engagement or that it is something to be used in our political engagement. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how you see both of these different approaches at play, and what you envision as a more faithful Christian political witness, what in the book you define as kingdom politics.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, I think we do have these two modes where Christianity is seen to be of, at best, private and personal value, and is not fit to provide or contribute anything to decision making or really public life generally. Dallas Willard refers to this as the disappearance of moral knowledge. And then there's this view that a lot of political actors see great utility in religion as a vehicle for amassing power and directing folks and reaching them. And I think that there are some benevolent or sort of neutral expressions of this, and then I think there are some really malevolent ones. I think the healthiest way to position our political involvement is to think of it as part of our life, part of the life we are living with Jesus. God's kingdom, and this is all, and just for context here, my book is an application of the ideas of Dallas Willard, who was a philosopher and teacher and writer, to our politics and public life. And Willard said that God's kingdom is the range of his effective will. where what he says to be done is done. But Willard would say that we each have our own sort of little kingdoms, the range of our effective will, where what we say to be done is done. And the Christian life is about putting that which is within the range of our effective will in and under the will of God. And so politics is within the range of our effective will, at least in America, at least in representative democracies. Politics is within the range of our effective will. Now, what's not within the range of our effective will most of the time are political outcomes. We don't get to choose who's on the ballot. Our voice isn't the one voice that gets to determine that. We don't determine what typically what specific legislation says, but we do have some responsibilities where what happens with those responsibilities we have say over, and we want to put that, like we would any other responsibility, in the flow of the life we're living with Jesus. And I think that rightly situates the moral burden of politics, which I think has gotten quite misplaced and manipulative.
So you talk about encouraging what you call a gentler politics. And I feel like typically the words gentle and politics are not two words that we see going hand in hand. And you give some examples of kind of what people's pushback might be to the idea of gentle politics. And so I wonder if you could talk about, what is the pushback you've received to the idea of a gentle politics, and how do you see a gentler politics potentially unfolding? I'm especially, I'll play my cards here. I'm really interested in, I think there's so much rhetoric about how anger can be important, about how, if you're not angry at the injustices in the world, then you're not paying attention. And your vision does not, give a pass to these injustices. But and I'm just
Yes.
saying exactly, what I want, to hear you talk about this.
I think we have such a low view of politics that is actually its own form of idolatry that suggests that the way of Jesus just is not viable there. Gentleness in politics, what are you even talking about? Jerry Seinfeld once had a bit where he'd say, the word head, fine. The word cheese is fine. Put them together. What are you doing? Head cheese, get out of here. And people think of faith in politics. People think of moral knowledge as these kinds of things, words that should not go together. There are a lot of problems with this. I think our public life is suffering today from a lack of positive Christian contribution. It's also a discipleship issue. There is no political you. There's just you. And so if you are a person who can't talk about politics without angrily dismissing or dehumanizing those you're interacting with, that is the kind of person you are. That's not, it's only politics where I dehumanize other people. You should, no, we are living one life with Jesus, and we are seeking to be formed into Christ-likeness from the inside out. And the human spirit does not work in such a way that our political behavior or the things that we think about or the things that we do when politics is in the room, we're not the kind of people where that stays quarantined off into something other than ourselves. No, we need to actually contend with the kind of people we are. And politics is a part of doing that.
So a term that you've used a few times here that you expound at length in the book is moral knowledge. And so I'm wondering if, for those who have not read the book, if you could talk a little bit more about what do you mean, what does Dallas Willard mean by moral knowledge, and how does that contribute to the conversation tonight?
Yeah, so this is one of Dallas's principal sort of academic contributions. Dallas was first and foremost, in terms of vocation, a philosopher. And the disappearance of moral knowledge essentially refers to Willard's argument is that in the post-World War II period, gatekeepers of knowledge, by which he means principally academia, but also other leaders and decision makers decided that and acted as if moral knowledge, including but not limited to religious knowledge, is not fit to be publicly taught, that it does not qualify as publicly available knowledge. And when we talk about moral knowledge, we're talking about knowledge of good and evil, right and wrong, true and false. And this is developed in such a way, right? The problem with this is that we live in a moral universe, and politics, along with most other areas of our lives, require that we make moral decisions, regardless of whether we think moral knowledge is something to contend with or not. And part of the argument I make in the book is a great deal of the anxiety and belligerence that we see in our public life and our politics today, it is actually not an abundance of confidence. It's actually a real crisis of confidence, a lack of confidence. That is what happens when you feel like you are forced to make moral assertions without moral authority. And I think that's really a succinct way of describing so much of what our politics is right now, making moral assertions without even the hope or the aspiration or the expectation that there is a moral authority from which those assertions reliably spring. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about moral knowledge. I just had an essay come out on this in National Affairs magazine that is you want to have to buy the book. It's publicly available, as much as I would love for you to buy the book, but it's a pretty extensive essay that talks more about this concept. Yeah.
So your answer there also made me think of something else you talk about in the book about how in Christian political engagement, oftentimes what we see as being almost like or what gets portrayed as being like too intense of Christian political engagement, you say is actually not being Christian enough. And in the same way, it is almost that like lack of faith in this lack of belief that there is actually a God who is engaged in our political lives and who has called us to live a certain way and to engage in a certain way, and who does, engage in our world. And yeah, I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit more on this idea of our politics that we think might be too Christian actually being not Christian enough.
Yes, I think I am unwilling to cede the moniker of Christian to someone who would say, yes, I know Jesus taught love your enemies, but if you do that in politics, you'll get run over. So, try it in your personal life, but in politics, it really doesn't work. Like, trust me on this one. Look at Colossians 3. And we, that is the test, or one test, or one way of thinking about what it means to have a Christian public presence. You take off the old self with its practices, put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge of the image of its creator. Put off rage and malice and anger. Put on gentleness. If we're advancing a politics that is inconsistent with that, then I think it's at the very least contestable, and we shouldn't cede sort of. There is this idea that if you're not angry about something, if you're not contemptuous of those who disagree with you, you must not really believe it. But that is not Jesus's model. That is not something Jesus ever taught. In fact, his life was a direct repudiation of that very kind of logic. And so that's what the problem isn't that we believe things too deeply. the problem, one of the problems, what I describe in my book is something I call political therapeutic deism, which essentially refers to a set of beliefs that provide sort of divine affirmation for a supplemental support for one's politics, but it's not the core thing.
Mhm.
So the kinds of beliefs associated with political therapeutic deism are things like God is on my political party's side, or my behavior in politics is justified by the political positions I hold. These are very difficult and destructive ideas, not principally to our politics, though there's damage there, but what it does to the human soul, what it does to one's relationship with God, that is a primary of concern.
Yeah. So I spend a lot of time thinking about the internet and social media, and just generally the ways that social media shapes who we are and how we engage. And I'm sure that, this is not purely an internet problem or a social media problem. Cable news is just as much of a sort of problem, but I'm thinking specifically about kind of our generation, that so much of our political engagement has been shaped, I think, by social media, and this idea that, what it means to be politically engaged is to post about, what you care about, or post about who you're voting for, or post about policies that you should advocate for or be scared against. And one of the sort of tropes that we see a lot on Twitter and some on Instagram is, if your pastor doesn't mention X, Y, or Z issue in the pulpit today, then you should leave. That it is like the responsible engagement is just like making known where you stand. And one of the things that I so value about CPJ's work is that they are actually, they are actually getting people involved in advocacy work in practical, very tangible ways. My first interaction with the Center for Public Justice was that I joined them on a call with one of my own senators a couple of years ago, to talk about the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. And that conversation actually changed the way that my senator voted on the act. And it was just a very clear picture of, it was not the like posting an angry, there are plenty of reasons that I could be frustrated with this particular senator, but it was not angry Instagram posts that got him to change his mind. It was sitting on a call together and talking through, like, here's what's at stake in this particular act, and here are the people who, here is how this is going to affect, if you vote in this way or in this way, and believing, actually truly believing that he is someone that cared for his constituents, and that hearing the perspective of like, this is how this policy will benefit your constituents, made a difference. That this calm engagement, this sort of I think like hospitality-centered engagement, this actually having conversation, is what made a significant difference. And that was really meaningful for me to see that at play. So at the end of your book, you have this example of kind of a week in the life of a woman that I forget, is her name Lisa or
Laura?
That's it. I knew it was an L. And I love the way this unfolds, sort of her life. It again is this picture of political engagement being an extension of hospitality, that Laura is so engaged in care for her community and wanting to understand the needs of her community. And then from there, realizing what political engagement on behalf of her community looks like, that it shapes her relationship to her neighborhood, to her church, etc. And so I wondered if for so many of us that have been raised with this idea of like, political engagement is making our views known on the internet, or fighting with our crazy uncle at the Thanksgiving dinner table. Or for people who might think like, as a Christian, I just don't want to be engaged in politics. What would be some of the basic sort of first steps that you might encourage? If someone is like, Laura's life feels like maybe a lot for me right now, what would be one or two first steps that you would want to see someone take um, in thinking about political engagement in terms of their relationship and their role in community?
Yeah. Well, first, Dorothy, yes, I know FCNL well, and I serve on the board of an organization that supports their work around uh, uh, nuclear nonproliferation, and so yeah, thanks for pointing that out. FCNL is a fellow with the organization I serve on the board with today. So that's funny you raised that. So you said the first two things. I mean, the first two things would be prayer and listening. And so I think those are good places to start. To go a bit. I think people feel so often they almost in a masochistic sort of way, like if I don't if I care about this issue, then say that no, we're able to consider the passions, that God has given us most useful. And so be attentive to the needs of your community. I have a friend who works at a national organization that does internationally impactful work. This same friend has spent the last 3 years of his personal time negotiating with stakeholders in his town about a community pool. And so, he works however many hours a day he's working to support entrepreneurs all around the world and dealing with immense resources. And then he gets off work and goes to the local town hall meeting where he feels passionately about this community pool and the way that it will serve the needs of the community. And, I think I believe that's a model. He was attentive enough to what was happening around him. He saw a specific issue that implicated politics. So a lot of times people take to politics things that aren't about governance. And so they'll take things that upset them. They'll take various animosities and resentments, or even loves and passions, and say, okay, how can I make this sort of political, or what can I, and instead it's, what are the areas of governance that are meaningful to you and the community you serve, and what are focused ways in which I could be helpful. I think one of the worst things that could happen is that people feel like a terrible burden about this. I think that there are seasons for civic involvement for various levels of it. I think the last around my first book, maybe 6-7 months after it came out, I was doing an event at a church, and a pastor came up to me and said, I read your book, or I think he said, I'm working my way through your book, and I want you to know you've convinced me that political involvement is vital, and so I hope you're proud of me. I check the polls every day when I wake up in the morning, and you just go, that is not the kind of political engagement I was hoping for. That's why I wrote the second book. I needed to get a little
a little bit more specific.
Yeah. Or he needed to get past chapter 1. But yeah, so I think maybe just one more story here, which is I have a friend who reached out to me. He was concerned. His son, he'd been noticing his son had been spending a lot more time on it's called Twitch, and basically you can watch people play video games online, but they'll also often talk about completely separate topics while they're playing the video game. And he had been following this Twitch streamer who had a lot of political opinions. And my friend said, you know, I'm worried about not that he's focusing on politics too much necessarily, but I'm worried about the stridency of the views that he's hearing. And I think I think we have a tendency in the church to say, okay, if you're worried about politics becoming an idol, then the thing is you gotta tell them to ignore politics altogether. And perhaps in some circumstances that's appropriate advice. In this circumstance, I said, you know, why don't you ask your son if there's an issue that he feels passionately about, and if there's a way that the two of you together could do something productive on the issue. Maybe it's education. And instead of watching the Twitch streamer online, you can actually go to the school board meeting. And I think we have this idea that the people who are most involved in politics are the ones that hold politics as an idol. And I've found that doesn't hold. It's people who actually participate in our political life that know how frail and to use CPJ language, how proximate all of it is. This is not people who work on Capitol Hill, people who work in policy think tanks. They know utopia is not coming. They're just trying to inch forward day after day, and that's the work of our civic life. It's the work that by the nature we're called to.
Yeah. Well, I want to open up the chat box for questions if anyone has questions. But while we give some time for people to think about and input their questions, I have one more question for you, Michael, and that is, as we are headed into this next election season, I'm curious how you are praying for this country and for the church through this season. And, you know, I'm hoping maybe, you know, part of why I ask this is that I think a lot of the messaging that I'm hearing from Christians is one of fear, of this like fear of kind of Christian nationalist rhetoric, this fear of, you know, of the direction that that Christian witness is playing. And so I'm curious, what is your prayer for the church and for this country in this season?
Yes. I think I am concerned by how often I hear people talk as if this election and our politics is happening that need to just sort of cross their fingers and hope that they make it on the other side, that their families remain intact, that their church small group remains intact. And I think that's an unhealthy posture to be in. I also think it means that we are so embedded in this defensive posture that we are not taking the opportunity to turn and think about what we can contribute in this kind of toxic political environment. Instead of asking, you know, how can the church just get through these next, 5 months, 6 months? Why don't we ask, how could the church be a witness to a different way, to a better way, where there's no male or female, no Jew or Gentile, no Republican or Democrat? Our aspirations are so low for what God can do through his church in this environment. And so my prayer for the church, and what I see when I visit college campuses and when I visit churches around the country, are people who are willing to trust that Jesus has something for them, even in the midst of our political life. And that would be my prayer for the whole church.
Yeah. feel like I have felt very lucky since 2016, really. That's when I started traveling a lot and working with churches a lot and really getting to be in conversation with Christians all across the country and from a wide variety of backgrounds. And I forget what a gift it is to actually be able to hear people on the ground. And I think it is much more hopeful when you're actually talking to people all over the place than what we might hear from the grander rhetoric sort of on the news or on the internet. That it continually gives me hope to hear from people who are, who are engaged, who are thoughtful, who are prayerful, who are doing the kingdom politics work that you're setting forth. So yeah, thank you for identifying that. I'll give another minute in case anyone has any questions. Please feel free to enter them into the chat box, or else I would love to share with you a little bit more about a resource that Edible Theology has, and then Maddie will share a little bit about CPJ. So it looks like we don't have any more questions coming in. So thank you, Michael, so much for being here for this conversation. Can you tell everyone a little bit quickly where they can find you and your work, and also how they can get involved in the things that you're doing?
Yeah, sure. You could visit our website at ccpubliclife.org. Would encourage you to consider attending our second annual summit in Washington, D.C., October 7th through the 8th, and you can find all the details for that on the website. And then the book, The Spirit of Our Politics, is available wherever you get your books. I should also add, earlier this month, we launched a podcast which features content from our first summit. And so the name of that podcast is For the Good of the Public, and that's available iTunes, Spotify, etc. And again, you could learn about that as well at ccpubliclife.org. Thanks so much for having me, Kendall.
Yeah. Can you tell people quickly about your other podcast too with Melissa, your morning?
Yes. So that is it's called the Morning Five. And the Morning Five, Mondays through Thursdays, we 5 to 7 minutes. It's prayer, it's scripture, and the headlines of the day. And it's a really simple message and habit we're trying to build up, which is just creating the expectation among Christians that they can bring the worries and the news of the day before Jesus. And so we love doing that podcast. We've been doing it now for several years and 600,000 downloads, and here are just wonderful stories of parents using it to spark conversations with their teenage kids and all kinds of different stories. So it's been a great thing. Thanks for asking, Kendall.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate you being here in conversation with us. It really is such a gift to our community, and we'll share this recording with our whole email list. And so very excited for others to get to hear this conversation as well. So I'm so grateful for the work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
So for anyone else that if you are interested in having conversations in your community, ways to build relationship, build community, and have sort of that starting point to be able to talk about things like how do we advocate for our neighborhood, for our city, for our county, or our state, then I would love to encourage you to check out Edible Theology's curriculum, Worship at the Table. The goal of this curriculum is first to just get people together around the table, and then to get you starting to tell stories about foods that are meaningful to you, about tables that are meaningful to you. Because when we start telling stories about the foods that are meaningful to us, then we start telling stories about where we come from, about our family, about the things that are important to us, and that leads us into conversations about when we talk about what's important to us, we then start to talk about, how do we then advocate for the people that we care about and advocate for the world that we want to create. And so we at Edible Theology see this as a first step to building the kind of trust and relationship that then allows us to learn to live in community and care for community in a way that shapes our political engagement. So Worship at the Table is available on our website. If you have not yet checked it out, I highly encourage you. My prayer is that through this fall, it is a tool that churches can use if they are taking that sort of white-knuckled approach of, I hope our small group just makes it through this election season. I hope this curriculum can be an alternate way of navigating this season of really digging into relationship and hopefully fostering the kinds of conversations that are needed and important. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Maddie, who's going to share a little bit about how you all can be involved in the Center for Public Justice.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kendall. And I know Michael had to hop off, but I just have to say, Michael is such a gift to this conversation. Michael is one of the reasons I started getting interested in advocacy and really had hope for Christian involvement in public policy and politics back when I was in grad school years ago. So I'm such a fan of his work, and he really walks the talk to so many of these things. So yes, please check out his work, attend the summit. I will be there. CPJ will be there. It's a really good thing that they're doing. And I'm excited about their future. So CPJ's goal really is to equip citizens with Christians, particularly Christian citizens, with civic education that points them towards a hopeful disposition. But it's not just civic education in the sense of a hopeful disposition because it's fun or it's easy, but because it's honest and truthful about the state of our world and the struggles that families are having, while acknowledging that God cares deeply for those families and deeply about our communities. And we get to be a part of God's work in our communities by also caring deeply and using any of the different power and privilege that we have to advance the flourishing of those families and the flourishing of our own families when we advocate for ourselves. Because I think sometimes we only think about advocacy for other people, but advocacy in public policy and your interaction in politics, it forms yourself too. So at CPJ, you can check out our website. I absolutely recommend, but Families Valued in particular has a newsletter that we send out monthly that has any policy updates on family policy. So updates on Medicaid expansion, on paid family leave, on maternal health issues. We also spend a lot of time in that newsletter just talking about different issues that are happening in families that don't necessarily have a direct policy correlation yet, but there might be one coming. Things like childcare and the struggles of making sure that childcare is equitable when it comes to working for working mothers and working fathers. So there's an opportunity to sign up for that newsletter. All these resources and the links to sign up for these things will come in a follow-up email to you if you register for this event. But then in addition, we will host 2 more events this upcoming year. One will be with Shannon Martin, talking to your neighbors and what that looks like inherently and we will actually be hosting that in September, right before the election, really priming you of what does it actually look like to talk about policy you might disagree with because it matters to you and your family or it matters to someone in your community. And then in December, we will be having a conversation with Karen Swallow-Prior about building an imagination for hope and a world in which politics can be better. Because yes, I think we've really given in to this very dystopian kind of fatalist attitude that we don't necessarily have to have. So I invite you to both those conversations. We will have the registration links in our newsletter as well, so that you can sign up and make sure you can attend those conversations, which I think will be a real blessing. We often have one-off opportunities for advocacy opportunities, like Kendall mentioned, where she was able to meet with her senator, that will also come out in our newsletter and if you're on our email list. So that's a great place to get involved. So keep an eye out for that follow-up, which will have all those links. And we really hope that you'll be able to partner with us and we can be a resource to help you have access to some of this trickier political language that doesn't come naturally sometimes, but you are a citizen who has power and gets to have a say. Which is a real gift, and we want you to be able to be a part of this work. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Maddie. I just am so grateful to everyone who came to be a part of this tonight and everyone who is watching the recording, and so grateful to Maddie and to Michael for helping make this evening happen. So thank you all so much for being a part of this. As Maddie said, you will get a follow-up email that has more information about how you can get involved. But I cannot commend Michael's book to you enough. If you need a really hopeful blueprint for how to engage faithfully over the next 6 months, then this is just such a really, really great book. I'm so grateful that it is out in the world. So I cannot commend it to you enough. So thank you all so much for being a part of this. I am really grateful that you all are here. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I very much enjoyed it.
Good. Thank you so much.